Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to my complete Dori guide. Dori is the newest character in Electro Healer 4-star, featured on the current raid up banners that just got released in the second half of version 3.0. In today's video, we're going to be covering Dori's abilities and playstyle, how to use her, and get the most value out of her kit. We're also going to be talking about how good Dori is and whether I believe she's worth pulling for and using, while also covering the best ways to build her, covering her best artifacts, weapons, teams, and all that. Before we begin, I do want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested, and with that said, I want to keep this intro pretty short, so let's get right into it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do in this video is talk about Dori's talents, give you a quick rundown on what her abilities do, before moving on to a more in-depth analysis on how you should be using her and my thoughts on her in the meta and if you should use her. First of all, her elemental skill is a very straightforward ability. Where you press it, it'll fire this lamp that will explode, split into two, then track opponents and deal electro damage. This ability has a pretty low cooldown, so you can use it basically whenever you swap into Dori, and it has a pretty okay scaling, although it does scale with your attack, whereas your healing scales with HP, as we'll see later, so that is something to keep in mind, as you may not be prioritizing attack, so you won't be getting that much value out of your skill. Moving on though, your burst is going to be the main part of your kit. Your elemental burst will summon the genie by placing this lamp on the ground that will connect to your active character. What this genie is going to do is, first of all, heal the active character based on your Dori's HP, while also generating some HP for them. So you're going to constantly heal and give energy to your active character, while also dealing a bit of electro damage passively to opponents that are between you and the lamp on that sort of connector beam. On top of that, your active character will also be affected by electro, which has some uses like notably cleansing your character, or self-swirling that electro with someone like Jean or Kazuha. But in general, you're mainly using your burst to heal you, generate energy, and apply electro. Because of that, we're actually going to dive into how good each of these are so that we can actually evaluate how good Dori is. Before we do that though, let's first start by looking at her damage on her elemental burst. As you can see, the scaling at level 8 is 25%, which isn't a lot, but you do hit very often. In fact, you can deal one instance of electro damage every 0.4 seconds for its entire 12-second duration. Because of that, you can hit up to like 30 times, which will give you roughly a 750% scaling at talent level 8, but obviously this goes up or down depending on your talent level and how many times you're hitting. If you are building for your damage, in general, because of Dori's split scaling, which I've already talked about, where your healing is on HP, reaction damage would be on EM, and you also need a lot of energy recharge in your build, the actual damage you're going to be dealing from this isn't its main selling point, especially with a standard healer build. With that said though, obviously you're not running Dori for her damage, which is why we have to talk about her healing, electro application, and energy regeneration. In fact, thanks to one of Dori's passive talents, she can also regenerate some energy for herself, gaining 5 energy for every 100% energy recharge you have, for a maximum of 15 when your elemental skill hits opponents. This is just passive energy for your Dori, which can alleviate how much energy recharge you need, although as we'll see, you do still need a lot. Dori also has another passive where the cooldown of your skill will be lowered when your active character connected to your genie procs an electro related reaction. While on paper this can be nice and can give you more energy by using your burst more often, you typically aren't going to be swapping into your Dori that often anyways to make use of this passive, but it is something that is, a nice bonus to keep in mind. With that said, let's now actually evaluate how good Dori is and examine her burst in more detail. Alright, so first of all, what most people want to know, how good is her healing? Well, on my current build where I'm stacking enough energy recharge but running an HP goblet and a healing bonus circlet, it is best described as adequate. It's not an excessive amount where you won't be able to fully cap the ocean hued clam set for example, but it's enough to keep your active character healthy. It is single target and only to the character that is linked to the genie and out on field, but as you can see by how much it is ticking, with my talent level 8 Dori, it is a okay amount of healing. With that said though, as I always say with healer characters, it's really about the rest of their kit that makes them worth putting in your team or not. Well, since Dori is an electro healer, you would use her when obviously you want healing and electro application, with her competition mainly being Kuki. Well, given that fact, regarding her electro application, it is okay but not the best. As you can see during her burst, if we look at how many times her electro is going to apply and look at its ICD, you'll see that it applies electro roughly every 3 seconds, with a total of 4 electro procs inside of your burst. Applying electro 4 times throughout the 12-second duration of your burst is okay, but not ideal when you consider the fact that this ability has a lot of downtime. Since the duration of your burst is 12 seconds, but the cooldown is 20, you'll have 8 seconds where you're not going to be applying electro from off field. When you consider the fact that you don't have any constellations to increase this, and you compare this with other electro characters like Fischl or even Kuki who do have a higher duration, it is not exactly the best look. Something unique Dori has though is actually energy generation on her burst to your on-field character. As you can see at talent level 8, you gain 2.3 energy, and this does go up to the active character that is connected to your genie every time it ticks, and it will obviously consistently do this. To show you guys what I mean, I'm going to use my burst here and then swap to my Ito who just used his and is a empty elemental burst gauge, and as you can see, it will passively give me some energy to help, fill up my bar. Now, do keep in mind that I am starting with 135 energy recharge on my Ito, which is a pretty standard amount, and as you can see, it gave me a okay amount of energy. While this amount isn't particularly amazing, it is enough to give her a sort of strength strength compared to other characters. When you pair this with Dori's Favonius weapon, you can get a pretty okay amount of energy for your team. And so because of that, the reasons to potentially use Dori are going to be for an Electro healer who can apply some Electro through her burst, proc some reactions like Hyper Bloom, while passively regenning some energy for your main character. I do want to say though that the energy regen you give is okay, but not like insane. Same with the healing, and for the Electro application, while it is okay, in my opinion, the 8-second downtime on your burst is usually going to be bad enough to where you won't use her in a meta perspective. Like most teams would rather use either Kuki or Fischl with a healer of another element, at least from my testing thus far, and obviously this could change. There are some exceptions, like potentially a Eula team if your Eula wants that energy, and you can run Dori and then like crowd characters with it, which is personally a team where I actually have been somewhat enjoying Dori. When you pair that with the fact that her scalings are all over the place, with either scaling on attack or HP and wanting energy recharge, her split scalings is another weakness that you have to consider, as when you build HP and maximize your healing, your damage will obviously suffer. Because of that, my honest opinion on her place in the meta is not the highest. I don't think she's someone you should go out and pull for, but if you have her, you can definitely make some use out of her, which I will cover in this video, giving you guys the best builds and teams in the next upcoming sections. In fact, let's actually get into what builds you're going to be running on a Dori that is optimized. Well, first of all, you should be running Dori as a support to your team, in my opinion. Because of that, for your Claymore, there's going to be two main category of weapons that you can be going for. You can either go for an energy recharge Claymore, because your burst has a very high energy cost of 80, and you only generate like 2 particles on your skill. Because of that, energy recharge on your weapon is going to be crucial to making sure you can get your burst back on cooldown, and if you run something like a Favonius Greatsword, you can also give energy to your whole party through its passive effect, which is really good. Now, while we'll cover exactly how much energy recharge you need when we talk about artifact stats, what I will say right now is you'll usually need upwards of 200%, to where having it on your Claymore, having energy recharge on your weapon is obviously extremely helpful. Because of that, I typically recommend going for an energy recharge Claymore, with Favonius being my general recommendation, but I also think that the Forest Regalia is really good as well, because while the energy recharge on it is less than Favonius, which as you can see at level 90 gives over 60% energy recharge because of how high the base stat is, whereas Sacrificial or the Forest Regalia will only give 30% at level 90. With that said though, Forest Regalia I think can be good in reaction based teams, as this weapon gives you some energy recharge and then its effect leaves a leaf on the ground that will give the active character that picks it up Elemental Mastery for 12 seconds. This amount scales with refinement, being 60 EM at refinement rank 1 and 120 at refinement rank 5, which is honestly pretty good for reaction teams. Because of that, I believe having a supportive weapon that gives your Dori another strength, like Favonius or Forest Regalia, is the way that I recommend playing her. With that said, other energy recharge claymores like the Sacrificial Greatsword can be viable, and you could argue the same about Wolf's for its attack buffing effect, but a lot of the stats here are wasted. With that said, if you choose to run Dori in an Elemental Mastery build, proccing reactions like Hyper Bloom, and being the one to actually want to stack Elemental Mastery, being the one that procs those reactions, then going for Elemental Mastery Claymore can be viable. With that said, in those teams, since you do entirely depend on your burst, going for an Energy Recharge Greatsword or Claymore, and then going Elemental Mastery on your artifact stats is still going to be my recommendation, because obviously going Fav will give you a lot of utility, and then you could just build Elemental Mastery on your artifacts if you want to stack EM. With that said though, Elemental Mastery Claymores like Rain Slasher or the Blood-Tinted Greatsword are still going to be viable options purely for your reaction damage, but as I said, I do prefer the ER options. Before moving on, I did also want to quickly say that I wouldn't recommend going the Bell. I'm just mentioning this because I know I'll get a lot of questions about it. Yes, it's an HP scaling Claymore, so you can technically use it for your healing if you have no other option, but an Energy Recharge Claymore, a more supportive one, will usually just be better overall and can even end up giving you more healing by having an efficient passive that saves you a ton of energy, so you can build more HP on your artifacts and have to worry less about energy recharge, giving you more healing overall or more damage in the case of like Forest Regalia. Moving on, for the artifacts you want on Dori, there's a few sets that you can go depending on how you choose to play her. Well, first of all, for a generic supportive build, obviously the Noblesse Oblige set is the go-to for most support characters of this type. This is because when you use your burst, it will give all of your party members 20% attack for 12 seconds, which is obviously going to be a nice increase. Because of that, this is the general set that I recommend as just a generic support. For more options, if you are running a Dendro team, which again, since Dendro's a new element, there might be like new Dendro characters or whatever that can synergize with this character. If you are running a Dendro team, you can run 4-piece Deepwood on one of the characters in the party who can deal damage from their skill or burst from off-field, reducing the Dendro resistance of opponents by 30%. While who uses the set depends on your team. If Dori is your Electro support, she can be the character running the Deepwood memory set, as your burst will passively hit enemies from off-field. Next up, regarding the Ocean Hued Clam set, you can run the 4-piece that will deal damage based on how much you heal with the bubble that explodes, but given the fact that you'll only be healing around 2 times for every bubble, given how often your burst ticks, the damage from the set is not going to be that good because you can't fully cap the bubble, especially when compared to other characters like Kokomi that heal a lot more. With that that said, if you purely care about healing, this set is okay, but I would still typically just run her on Noblesse Oblige. With that said, I also wanted to quickly mention the 4-piece instructor set, as I believe this can be a very powerful supportive option in reaction-based teams. While yes, it is a 4-star set, which means you'll get worse stats overall, as long as you have enough energy recharge and just enough HP to actually heal your team, it should be fine and can be worth running, again, as I said, in reaction-based team comps, because the 4-piece set will give your party members 120 elemental mastery for 8 seconds when you trigger a reaction. This can therefore be a very powerful supportive artifact set that is definitely a viable option for Dori. With that said, if you just want to maximize your Dori's reaction damage, then going for either the 4-piece Gilded Dreams or the 4-piece Thunder Fury, which are sets that can increase your reaction damage with their 4-piece effects, and Gilded Dreams, for example, will just give you a ton of elemental mastery, they can be viable options for Dori. With that said, I do recommend playing her more so in the supportive / healer role, where I would recommend more supportive sets like Noblesse Oblige, but obviously all the sets that I mentioned in this section are viable, depending on how you use Dori and what your team comp looks like. Now moving on, what stats you want on Dori? Well, while this depends on your playstyle, the way you want to look for stats is as follows. First of all, you want to make sure you have enough energy recharge to spam your burst on cooldown, as that is the main part of your kit that matters. Then you can either build more healing or build more reaction damage in the form of elemental mastery. Now, while personally I tend to use Dori as more of a healer, I will cover both of these builds right now. First of all, regarding how much energy recharge you want, this highly depends on the team you're running and what weapon you're using. Running a weapon like Favonius can greatly decrease how much energy recharge you need, so that is recommended. With that said, if you're running another Electro character who can give you particles like Fischl, whereas if you're not, you can need a lot more, being around 200 energy recharge to 240 being a general range. Do keep in mind though, this does depend on how often you use your skill and what team you're running, so test out what works for you, but do keep in mind that generally speaking, Dori needs a lot of energy recharge. Other than energy recharge, you can also look for either HP % on your substats for healing, or elemental mastery if you want more reaction damage. Furthermore, crit rate can be very important if you're running a Favonius weapon to make sure you're proccing its effect. For your main stats, you definitely want energy recharge on your sands, unless you somehow have enough, in which case HP or elemental mastery can be good. For a healer build, I would recommend going for HP on the goblet and healing bonus on the circlet to maximize your healing, and for a reaction build, elemental mastery on the goblet and circlet instead. With that said, you can go for crit rate on your circlet if you want to proc your Favonius weapon and don't have enough crit rate on your substats, although it would typically be more efficient to just go for enough crit rate on your substats and still go for a different main stat circlet. Next up, let's quickly talk about Dori's constellations and see if they add any value to her kit. Well, first of all, her first constellation is going to give you another hit from your elemental skill, upping the amount of shots that your skill fires from 2 to 3. Your second constellation gives you a bit more damage from your genie, giving it another instance of damage every single time your genie heals you. This constellation can be nice for a bit more Electro application, as you'll be applying it a bit more, making it not terrible. Your C3 and 5 as always increase your talent levels, and your C4 is a pretty unique one that has more effects when your on-field character is either low HP or low on energy. In fact, when the on-field character is under 50% HP, they will gain 50% incoming healing bonus, which is nice for a bit of healing, but what really matters is the energy part, giving your active character 30% energy recharge when they are under 50% energy. Because of that, this is a good constellation, helping your on-field character restore their burst, which is very useful because typically you're going to be using your Dori's burst, then swapping to your DPS, and then using theirs. Because of that, the energy that you gain is going to be amplified, making this C4 actually pretty decent. Lastly, your C6 is also a unique one that can transform Dori into an on-field Thundering Fury carry, or at least auto attacker, like driver for a team, because after you use your skill, you gain Electro Infusion for 3 seconds, and will also heal your team passively when you normal attack. Because of that, this creates a unique playstyle for Dori with Electro infused normal attacks. With that said, Dori's constellations are okay. They don't make her like a game-breaking character, but you can get a bit more Electro application, at least from what I've seen be tested. And with your C4, you do gain that additional energy recharge to your active character when they're low energy, which is, in my opinion, pretty good. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about the teams where you can use Dori. Well, first of all, for the generic reactions where she can work, as an Electro healer, it's going to be obviously the Electro reactions that you want to build a team around, like Electro Charge and Hyper Bloom. First of all, for Hyper Bloom, I believe she can be run in a generic Hyper Bloom team with a Hydro and Dendro unit, and then the last slot being Flex, usually an Anemo support like Kazuha. A team like this can work, although the main problem that I found with Dori is that her burst has an 8-second downtime, which can be annoying in the rotation. And when you compare that to someone like keqing, whose downtime is less on her skill, Dori might not be the optimal choice. With that said though, Hyper Bloom teams in general Dori can be used in, and also teams like Electro Charged. While a lot of people have been talking about Dori in a potential Taser team, and it is viable, I believe if you need a healer, you can run Dori here. Typically, I wouldn't recommend it because who are you replacing in this team? Usually Beto, who's one of the strongest Electro characters in the game, or at least like a good off-field, burst DPS, who will give you damage reduction and a shield with C1, and paired with Xingqiu is usually enough to make you durable and not take too much damage. But if you need an Electro healer, Dori is viable in this team. With that said though, while there are just generic reactions you can run with Dori, I believe her best teams are number 1 with Eula, who wants an Electro support for Super Conduct, and who also wants a healer. While yes, you could run a cryo healer like Diona and then use Fischl or a more offensive Electro support, maybe even someone like Raiden or Beidou, Dori can give you the 2-in-1 of an Electro plus healer, similarly to Kuki, but Dori will also give your Eula a bit of energy while she's on field. Similarly, you can play Dorito or Ito and Dori for a similar reason, having an Electro character in your Geo team who will heal you and give you a bit of energy. With that said though, I believe Dori has a lot of teams where she can work without really being optimal. It's hard for me to find a use case for Dori in the meta where you absolutely want to use her, but obviously the generic teams that want an Electro plus healer as a 2-in-1 in the same character can utilize Dori, especially if you can make use of the energy that she'll give your on-field character. With that said, there's not much else to say though, like obviously use Dori if you want to. The 8-second downtime on her burst is annoying however, but I believe there are some ways to make use of her, either just using skill burst, swapping out and supporting your team, or by maybe spamming your skill in certain teams with like a sack greatsword. But again, there isn't really a meta team for that, at least as of right now, but maybe in the future I did want to at least mention that. And lastly, I did also want to quickly mention that Dori and Jean can have some synergy with one another. You can make variations of a Sunfire team, which I've made a video on, but with Electro, where you apply Electro to yourself and then swirl it with Jean, although I still don't think this is going to be nearly as good as like Jean, Raiden, Bennett, for example, in a Sunfire team, but I did want to mention it. You can apply Electro to yourself and then self-swirl it with either Jean or Kazuha, as I talked about earlier in the video. But yeah, overall, those are my thoughts on Dori as a character, an Electro support slash healer who can apply an okay amount of Electro, but unfortunately the downtime is quite annoying. She'll also give you some energy to your on-field character, so if that's what you want and you like her and want to play her, then by all means you can, and you can do it optimally with all the information and the builds that I showed in this video. With that said, stay tuned as a lot of new guides are coming soon. Notably, Kokomi and keqing guides are on the way. With that said, I hope this guide was helpful, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace. But yeah, so those are my thoughts on Kuki in general. Wait, fuck.